We're going to be recording this session, so we'll start recording. I see that here. Thanks, Carla. So thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Andrea Poli. I'm the Acting Associate Dean of Research for the College of Fine Arts, and I'm a Research Associate at the Center for Advanced Research Computing. And I'm so happy and excited to hear our speakers today and also get involved in our conversation. I'm going to quickly share my screen because today we are talking about broader impacts, and the definition and the way broader impacts is done has been changing quite a bit, but in a very, the very basic definition that I found one of the better ones at Duke, the Duke Science and Society site, is that broader impacts of your research are the societal impacts or benefits to society. So as we know, the NSF, National Science Foundation proposals require broader impacts in addition to the intellectual merit now. And many other grants, especially government federal grants, are going to implicitly want to see broader impacts because, of course, as publicly funded research, got muted here. The question is how is it relevant to the society and to people? So I will stop sharing now if I can. And give you a quick rundown of the session. So this session will speak to broader impacts, and the goal of the overall conference here is to bring researchers across campus together to discuss best practices for collaboration, community outreach, and of course, broader impacts. We really want to emphasize and encourage faculty to leverage these new networks that we're finding to build new programming. So this panel is going to have very short presentations by each of our esteemed 4 panelists, talking about their past and current broader impacts collaborations, including lessons learned, and then we will take time for a Q&A from the audience. So you have the opportunity as audience members to use your chat to ask questions that we'll address at the end of the panel's presentations, and you can unmute and speak your questions if that's more comfortable for you. And thank you to Carla here, who's going to be moderating the chat for us. So our esteemed panelists in order of presentation are Heather Himmelberger, Carrie Howe, Maria Lane, and Caroline Scruggs. So Heather Himmelberger is the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. The work of the center ties in with UNM's public service mission and often includes cutting-edge approaches to address water issues across the U.S. Carrie Howe is a professor in the Department of Civil, Construction, and Environmental Engineering and director of the Center for Water and the Environment. His areas of specialty include environmental engineering, physical and chemical processes for water and waste treatment, water chemistry, and engineering design. Maria Lane, our third speaker, is the former chair of Geography and Environmental Studies and currently directs the new R.H. Mallory Center for Community Geography. Her forthcoming book, Fluid Geographies, focuses on the history of water management in New Mexico. And our final speaker, Caroline Scruggs, is Associate Dean of Research for the School of Architecture and Planning. She has a background in environmental science, engineering, and policy, and is an EPA STAR Fellow, a Udall Foundation Fellow, and a licensed professional engineer. So with that, I will mute and invite Heather, our first presenter, to start. Thanks.
All right, let me just share my screen. Okay, and then if I can find, all right. Welcome everybody, and I'm glad to have you all here today. I just wanted to talk real briefly. We're only going to talk a few minutes and let everybody else ask questions after that. But the Southwest EFC is trying to focus on self-reliance. That's our main goal through training and technical assistance to get actionable results. And I did want to just mention that when we talk about broader impact, our work is all over the United States and the territories. That one picture I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the one picture there, the second one over on the top, is actually me standing on a oil platform out in the Gulf of Mexico. So we find ourselves everywhere, all 50 states, all the US territories, assisting with water and wastewater and stormwater issues all over the country. So we do have a very broad reach. The project I was going to talk about today is where we're trying to blend arts and science to communicate outside the bubble. So oftentimes what I think of is that the water world is really small. We see the same folks all the time. So if I go to conferences, I'll see a lot of the same faces. And we try to figure out how to communicate with others by talking only to each other. So we're trying to communicate outside our bubble to elected leaders, the broader community, and folks like that, but we're only talking to each other, which causes some problems. So one of the goals that I had for a really long time is to create what I would call the Khan Academy for Water. And if you've ever seen the Khan Academy, it's focused on trying to teach math and science to students, teachers, and parents. And you can get on the Khan Academy and find amazing information. It's very fact-based, very easy to understand. And we wanted to create a similar thing for water with general public, elected leaders, and water professionals as our audience. And so we finally got a chance to do that by a Grand Challenges grant that we got last year. Unfortunately, we couldn't do exactly what we wanted to do because COVID intervened, but we were able to do quite a bit. So we have podcasts, we have resources, we have some science to art where we have a picture using Native American symbols of how disinfection works. We have videos, and we're finishing up an animation this week that should be introduced at the sub. I think it's on Thursday. They're going to unveil our animation. So we'll even have one of those coming. We couldn't have done it without our collaborations. This was brand new collaborations for us. We collaborated with Film and Digital Arts, with James Stone and Dan Galassini, who's no longer there, and then Joni Palmer, who also, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, is not there, but she was in the CRP and Geography and Environmental Studies departments. And then we have students in CRP, Geography, and Film and Digital Arts, and all of those different programs brought us a new way of visualizing and telling our story and sharing important information, and having a film eye on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it is kind of amazing, something that I wasn't used to. And James had a lot of really good ideas about how to tell our story and how to share information. And then Joni has a real right-left brain combo going on where she's got a lot of the science, but she also has a lot of the arts in there. So just a couple of slides on the best practices. I think just being open to engagement outside of our comfort zone was really important. I, honest to God, didn't even know there was a film and digital arts program at UNM before we started this project. We literally picked up the phone and called them and said, hey, you want to collaborate with us? So it's a really new thing for us to reach across campus to places that we hadn't normally engaged. And it turned out amazing. So we're definitely open to more engagement in places that, you know, aren't the traditional places to go. And we also wanted to ensure that everyone on the team, including our students, was on equal footing. So we wanted everybody to provide opportunities. We have lots and lots of meetings and collaborations where everybody can say what they think about something. So we wanted to ensure that everybody had equal footing, no matter who they were, whether they were student or professor or department head. It didn't make any difference that when we were collaborating, everybody was on equal footing and could share. So we really feel like we've made tremendous progress and really can go forward. And we've actually submitted about 4 or 5 proposals already with this group to try to get additional funding, and we're going to do more of that. And I encourage you to look at our EFLA site when you get a chance, and you'll see some amazing products up there, and more of that will be happening. So with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker.
And I'm Carrie Howe. I'll be speaking next. So let me go ahead and share my screen. You should be seeing my presentation now. And I'm going to be talking about the Center for Water and the Environment, and specifically one major grant within the center, actually the grant that started the center. And that grant was from the CREST program at the National Science Foundation. So CREST is a program in the Division of Human Resources Development, and its focus is on increasing the underrepresented minority population participating in STEM. And we've had a center grant, actually two center grants from the CREST program. So the two grants together provided over $10 million in funding over a 10-year period. We're about 6 or 7 years into that right now. The overall mission of our center is to develop solutions to environmental problems with water in arid environments specifically, and with water and energy, increase the underrepresented minority participation in STEM, and importantly, considering economic, policy, and societal implications. And that's where partnering outside just engineering has become really important. So our participants in this center have mostly been from civil and environmental engineering, but we also have team members from across campus, including Janie Chermak in economics, Caroline Scruggs in community and regional planning, who's another one of the participants in this panel today. Also now Lonnie Sinagini in community and regional planning, and Laura Crossie in earth and planetary sciences. So our research themes have had to do with the impact of forest fires and drought on watersheds and water supply, treatment technologies for removing contaminants, and interactions between water and energy resources. So I want to talk specifically about the broader impacts of this grant and this program. And the broader impacts really, when NSF talks about their broader impacts, they talk, as it was mentioned at the beginning, the potential benefit to society and the ability to contribute to specific desired societal outcomes. And so our broader impacts are really through the research itself. The research is helping society, benefiting society by improving our water supply. And there's also a kind of a separate broader impact, and that's encouraging underrepresented minorities to go into science and engineering. So the important thing is we can't look at the research just through one lens, through engineering by itself, but having to consider societal impacts is an important part of our broader impacts. So some quick lessons learned as we've included broader impacts in this research. First thing is that the broader impacts really have to be integral to the research, not something that's just tacked on the side of a grant. It's really important to get everyone involved and not have a separate individual or a separate team doing broader impacts that's not engaged in the research. So really everyone has to be involved in both the research and the broader impacts. But having said that, it's also what we found important to have someone in charge, someone to help organize those efforts. So if the first grant we had from the CREST program, we had individual faculty trying to engage with outreach activities. And that was really challenging because everyone's really busy. So when we came to our phase 2 grant, we hired an outreach coordinator. And that's really helped us step up our game with regard to broader impacts. So those are kind of the main key lessons learned that we've had from our broader impacts. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Maria Lane.
All right, thank you. And I am going to share. Okay. And I only have really one slide, but I didn't want to be left out with the slide sharing. So I just want to talk real briefly about our new Center for Community Geography, which is within the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, but is meant to intersect across multiple units in a more interdisciplinary way. Eventually, I think we might move out of geography, but for now, that's where we are. So what we're trying to do is foster community engagement at a really fundamental level in research and teaching. So starting research with community generated questions, valuing community knowledge and local members of different units as knowledge producers, and thinking about how to organize things like student learning in the classroom around community priorities, things like that. So this is different from how we usually are starting research, of course. And we're trying to help people think through how to do this kind of different approach. So we're brand new. We just started this year. We've been doing a few pilot projects. We did just announce funding opportunities for next year, 2 kinds of funding. One is for faculty who are interested in bringing community engagement into their classrooms in a new way. So those are like seed funding. And then also for students who are thinking about community engaged research as like a thesis or dissertation focus. So we're going to be next year doing some training and workshops about how to change that orientation and have the focus be less on the researcher and more on the community originated questions. And again, I think this is just on the spectrum of what we're already thinking about when we think about broader impacts and what is the benefit to society. But to really, instead of having the research project and then going and working to make sure we communicate it and leverage the broader impacts, this is always meant to start at the level of the community question and not at the researcher level. So it's a different kind of approach that we want. This is not for everyone, but this is something that we want to make this more available to people on campus to think about this and to work in this way. In our center, we're focused on human environment issues broadly, and currently focusing on the 3 areas of citizen science, critical cartography, and critical physical geography. So if you're interested in any of these and you want to learn more or chat with us, this is just an image from our website, but so that you can see our address there on the left, communitygeography.unm.edu, and that's my email address on the bottom right. So just get in touch. Like I said, we did just announce funding. I just wanted to let people know that we're here and that we're wanting to help foster this as another model for how to engage in broader impacts. And I think I'll just leave it at that, and happy to talk in questions about specific projects as needed. And I will pass it on to Caroline.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And I have a few slides too, just so that I don't feel left out. Let's see. Let me put this on presenter view. And yeah, so I'm here to talk from the perspective of someone who's done broader impacts work on some large federally funded research projects, and talk about the benefits to that broader impacts faculty, and also some lessons learned, just to if there are people in the session today who are wanting to get involved, just some lessons learned to help you figure out what the right fit might be. And I'm going to use the NSF CRUST example because I knew Carrie was going to introduce it already. So I guess, so my background is in environmental engineering, and I have an interdisciplinary PhD, which moved me more into policy and social science research methods. And I'll use an example from my experience to offer my main point here. So as an enthusiastic new faculty at UNM, in my first summer here, I made my one and only attempt at an NSF career proposal. And so it was an interdisciplinary proposal. I submitted it to CBET in the Directorate for Engineering for lack of a better fit. And perhaps not surprisingly, the proposal was declined because it wasn't engineering-y enough. And so I want to highlight here that, you know, there really isn't a good place at some of the large federal funders like NSF. You know, there's, of course, lots of other foundations and other places to get funding. But as far as, you know, the kind of scale of money and resources from a place like NSF, there's not really a great place for a single PI interdisciplinary proposal. And I also want to highlight that there aren't directorates for PIs in the design fields and some of the other disciplines that might be well suited for broader impacts kinds of work. And that makes these kinds of opportunities for broader impacts collaboration that we're talking about here today so important for many faculty at UNM. And so I was basically able to take the research I proposed in that declined career proposal and pitch it to Carrie Howe and his team as my contribution to the overall NSF CRUST proposal that was developing at the time. And my work was basically the broader impacts of what Carrie and his students were doing in part of their research. So he and his students would be doing research on the science and technology around how to do potable water reuse safely, as you know, some of the research that they were doing. And potable water reuse is basically purifying wastewater and reusing it as drinking water. And so my research would provide a better understanding of the public perceptions around this practice, because even if you have the best science and technologies to do it, the public has shut down a number of these kinds of projects for various reasons. So the public engagement, outreach, and education piece is hugely important on this topic. So let's see. So my main message here is that you know, getting to be part of this team was such a highlight in my time at UNM, both for the support it provided through other faculty and resources, but also in developing my own research agenda. I think that the CRUST project, being part of that team, was really important in helping me make a successful case for tenure a few years ago. But my message is that, you know, in the drive to get external funding as required by many departments on campus, it's easy for faculty to lose sight of their research agendas. And depending on the department, not having a cohesive research agenda could have a big negative impact on tenure and promotion. So faculty might, you know, find themselves doing support work for a collaborative project or serving in a certain kind of role that they're well qualified for, but really isn't something that serves their research agendas. And this work can be, you know, time consuming and possibly prevent them from pursuing other grants that might be more helpful toward their promotion package. So the point of this slide is really just to offer these suggestions as a starting point for the broader impacts faculty member. You know, collaborations, projects like this can be hugely beneficial. You learn to be part of a research team, how to write a big multidisciplinary proposal. You get funding to do research, but also think hard about how much time the collaboration will take and how it supports your research agenda, whether it does or not. For the project PI, I think it would be really useful to try to find the overlap that supports both the broader impacts faculty member and the project goals. So, you know, maybe starting with a one-on-one meeting with the broader impacts faculty member is a good starting point to discuss project goals and where potential overlaps might exist that could be beneficial to the broader impacts faculty member, and also provide meaningful broader impacts for the project. So that is what I have. Let me stop sharing here.
Thank you so much to the panelists. It's really exciting to hear about your work in broader impacts, which is, from what I've learned about broader impacts, very groundbreaking and exciting. And I would like to start out with some questions and also invite the attendees to put questions into the chat if you would like to. And let's just get going here, because I have a question for every panelist. I'm so excited about this. So just to start it off, Heather, you talked about how in your program you wanted everyone in the project on equal footing. Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use the animation that we're creating now. So we're creating an animation that will talk about the difference between bottled water and tap water and making that choice. And what we're trying to do is keep it as apolitical as possible, just very neutral, fact-based information. So we wanted to create an animation that kind of talked about bottled water, and then it talked about tap water. Now, obviously, like folks in our shop would know more about the ins and outs of how water's treated and that sort of thing. And having an animation student, undergraduate student who really doesn't have any background in water, you might have a tendency to say, well, we're going to rule on what the script is and how that's written, but that wasn't the case at all, because the film people and the animation people had lots of really good ideas about how we presented something or how the story should be told. And so they would say, hey, I like this part, but you're kind of maybe too in the weeds here, or you should write it this way. Or, James Stone, who's actually in the digital and media arts department, I think he's the chair of that department now, really came back several times with some great suggestions of like, hey, your tagline at the end doesn't really match this part of what you were talking about. And just his vision of a storytelling vision was quite helpful to how we did things. So, whether we have undergrads or grad students, which we had both of on this project, at all times we would let people be completely on equal footing of, anything that they wanted to suggest, any comments they had, ideas about how to do something. We would just take all of our, hats off as we went into the room, our Zoom rooms, and just let everybody be completely equal in suggesting ideas. And I think it really made for a much better product at the end than perhaps we would have had we just said, okay, we're writing the script and you're doing the animation. I think it would have been a completely different collaboration and much less effective. So we've really appreciated working with the students, the other professors, just having that, open, just brainstorming sessions at each time we did stuff. We did podcasts, videos, animations, I'm probably and blog posts. So we had like 4 different kinds of resources, and we had lots of collaboration on all of those.
Thank you. I think that also could have some traction in terms of what Caroline was talking about in collaborators and trying to fit things into your research agenda, which I want to ask about, but I want to first ask Carrie. You spoke about the importance of having a person in charge of broader impacts on your projects. How did your team find that person, and what kind of expertise did you find was needed?
Yeah, and let me be a little bit more clear about what I meant by someone in charge of broader impacts. In that regard, I was talking more about our outreach program, and I had a pretty short presentation, and I didn't go into much detail on this, but I did have a slide with 2 panels, one showing kind of students out in the field doing some water research, and then the right side of that slide showed some of our students at an outreach activity. And so our center kind of has these 2 components to it. Graduate and undergraduate students doing research on water issues, and then we're also going out and doing a lot of outreach to middle schools and high schools and community events, and doing these activities where we're trying to encourage youth to go into careers in science and engineering. And it's that second part that I think it was important to have someone help coordinate those events. And so what we have everyone, our students, our faculty engaged in participating in these events, but it's hard to make those happen without someone being in charge. So last summer, we put out an advertisement for specifically an outreach coordinator. And that person is a couple years out of school. She has a bachelor's degree in ecology. and has done community outreach type events. So is a perfect person for this job. And what she's doing is really coordinating the efforts of the rest, all the other faculty and all the other students involved in our center, and getting them to participate in these outreach activities. It makes it easier on everyone because everyone kind of knows where, well, in the future, they'll know where to show up and when. One of the challenges is that this outreach coordinator came on in the middle of a global pandemic. So we actually haven't been doing these in-person events in the last 9 months or so. As we move back into that type of activity, it'll be easier to get people engaged by having someone in charge of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the National Association for Broader Impacts, which is now ARIS, it has been a place where people who want to develop those skills and network can find opportunities. And I think it's becoming more and more a kind of career path for people who are working in science, but don't necessarily want to do bench science. I have, the next question I have is for Maria, and I just want to commend your team for such a integrated approach of broader impacts by involving the community at the level of determining the research questions. And I'm wondering, I've thought about this a lot. I'm thinking also about what Carolyn was saying about faculty members' research agendas. It seems like taking that approach would be a very scary thing to do. And I'm just kind of wondering how it's actually functioning in your project.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really central question. And I think, right now we're just doing a couple small-ish pilot projects that we're doing in the classroom context. And we're also trying to support a few graduate students who are taking on some community generated topics as like for thesis research. But really the challenge is that, the timelines of academia don't match well and easily the timelines of like anything else in the world. So this is the challenge, and what we're hoping to do, and I know, Caroline is really familiar with this because in CRP, they do a lot of applied community-based work through classes. And, this is something where what we're hoping we can do through the center is provide some of the support that can help offset some of those difficulties. And so in the context of a class, that means setting timelines that go beyond the semester and having like a student who we're going to fund to do a little bit more work in the summer to finish something off that couldn't really be finished during the time of the class. In the context of something like a thesis project or a faculty engaging on a research project, it's just a little harder. And so I think part of what needs to be done is just good matchmaking. And that's what we're trying to do as a center. This is not the right place for a brand new faculty member to sink a lot of their time because they need to be producing publications and getting things on the CV. They can't spend 4 years working with the community group to figure out what the question is. But someone who's a little bit more established can do that. So helping people find the right projects and the right level to engage so that they can keep doing what's required by academia while also trying to integrate community engagement at some level is what we're hoping to do. So I'm glad you raised that because it is really important. This is not an easy transition, and it really is the far end of the spectrum for broader impacts thinking.
Just a quick follow-up on that, and does it have to be someone who's involved in the science that's working with the community to develop the research question, or would a researcher whose field and discipline is about working with community and figuring out how to develop those research questions, would that be a better fit?
Yeah, I think it can be either or both. We have right now one student who's working with a group to help them figure out their question and essentially to format it into a proposal that student may or may not take that proposal and do the project, but then we can maybe look for funding and look for someone else who can do the proposal itself. So that's one way that we're trying to think of it, is like, you know, part of our service can be to just take your question and turn it into an academic format, you know, a proposal document that we can then act on that and have somebody else take it up. So yeah, I think it could be either, or it can be separated or some combination.
Caroline?
Yeah, can I just chime in? I feel like, you know, what Maria just described in her presentation can also work with, for a junior faculty, you know, coming up with a research question. Perhaps they know that there's some kind of problem around a certain topic, but they don't necessarily know the nuance or what would really be useful for the community. So I think that, you know, going into the community, doing focus groups and that sort of thing, you can do in the amount of time that a junior faculty would need to be getting publications out and that sort of thing, if the community agrees to, you know, having publications as a result. That gets to somebody's, I think it was Nicole's question in the chat about doing community engaged research, because then you need to oftentimes create output with the community, and that community might not want to share the results or that sort of thing. So it gets really complicated, and it's completely project specific. But I do think that those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So you could, you know, have the community help you understand what the real issue is, and then create the research questions around what they tell you, you know, help you understand in that way. So I think there are ways of doing it. Some of the like bigger, more complicated, larger community issues that the new center might address that Maria discussed might not lend themselves toward, you know, TNP for a junior faculty. But I think it could work depending on the topic, the question, and the community. So just wanted to jump in with that.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up quickly to say, I think that is part of the challenge, is then the matchmaking, right? Like helping the people who have certain, you know, needs and expertise in terms of their academic position find the right projects that are going to be mutually beneficial. So it will take us a little while to develop that expertise and find the right formats that are going to work. But that is our goal. Thank you.
It certainly seems that, you know, UNM's role as a public institution needs to address this, and it's wonderful to see the discussion going on in the chat from Nicole and David Hansen about the faculty handbook. So take a look at that. Are there any comments about that from our other panelists, Carrie or Heather, about this tenure and promotion and community engaged research?
I'll just say that I'm not a tenure professor. I'm not a professor at all. I am a staff position. So we're out there kind of, what I would say is we're like the public service part of UNM. So we're completely applied research and don't really engage that much in basic research. We're kind of maybe the in-between part where we can take the basic research and apply it in communities and real world applications. So that issue of tenure and whatnot doesn't come up for us, but I think for us, like everything we do, we try to think about those broader impacts. I mean, that is kind of our purpose to exist, is to have a bigger impact. And I think one of the benefits we saw, and I've been around UNM for 20 something years now, was at New Mexico Tech for a while too, is that we were kind of insular, and just reaching out across campus has opened up opportunities for us that we never even knew existed. And we've actually applied for several proposals now that include other parts of campus. And so I think just sort of that impetus to get out and look across campus and see what others are doing and how that can impact our work has been super, super powerful. And, you know, maybe it will help them, you know, because a lot of who we're reaching out to are professors, that maybe there's opportunities for them to even look at new areas or to get into new things that maybe they wouldn't have done without the collaboration with us. So I think it's really opened our eyes to looking even broader and, you know, more and more broadly about who we can collaborate with and how.
Carrie?
And I'll just quickly add on your question, Andrea. So when it comes to tenure and promotion, there's clearly no one model for success, right? And so by having some, I'd say, guidance in the faculty handbook that there is flexibility and options available with regard to community-based research, you know, I think that's just, you know, it gives departments the opportunity, you know, to consider other things. So I think that's going to be really good to have that information available.
Let me just say that, you know, UNM did get that designation, was it last year, as a community engaged campus, and there has been a call to all departments to include in the departmental guidelines how community engagement will be counted. And I know we went through that process in our department last year, but definitely agree that it should be at the level of the faculty handbook, that we have kind of basic guidelines on that.
And I think we're seeing a good example of collaborative research right now between Andy and Caroline.
I'm for backup. I'm our IT guy. I always have a backup plan.
Sorry, my computer crashed. But yeah, in community and regional planning, we, you know, saw this early on as kind of a problem, because some of our faculty, that's their main form of scholarship is community engaged scholarship. And so we wrote it into the school's tenure and promotion policy. And yeah, we've had Claudia Isaac is a great example of somebody who was recently promoted based on her her community engaged scholarship. And I think that junior faculty are kind of nervous about putting all their eggs in that basket, because it's not something that is in the faculty handbook yet. And it seems like it might not be as accepted across the campus. So I hope that that's something that it sounds like Dave was saying in the chat that there is some language being introduced there. And I think that'll be really useful to a lot of junior faculty on UNM campus.
Can I ask a question of a person who just chatted in, David, who just chatted in a question about whether we've used software or other tools to visualize efforts and outcomes of community engagement. And I'm just curious if you could say a little bit more, David, about what kind of software or technologies you're thinking of, about how that would be done. It sounds really intriguing. I'm just curious if you've thought at all about what you're thinking of.
Yeah, I've just been playing with this a bit. Actually, I last year I went to see a colleague in Belgium, and they had this great project that they were dealing with, where it was a tree banding, where people would go out. There were trees that had, you know, rulers banded, you know, wrapped around them everywhere, and a little QR code that they could just take a picture of and upload, put their data in, and then see a big visualization of this tree's growth for the last, you know, period of time, or all the trees in this city or all the area. And I was really intrigued about that. And then fortunately just had some folks in Wisconsin who are working not just with the databases you use that are free to upload this, you know, kind of information, like, and there are programs like iNaturalist that are specific to, you know, nature sort of things, but more generalized databases. And then they found this other program called Click to take that data and make these, you know, visualizations of the data in different graphs and just where they are on maps, so they're automatically popping up. And so I've just been starting playing with that, and I didn't know if anyone else has been trying that kind of stuff here, or other cooler things.
Yeah, mostly what we've done now is looking more like making animations to help explain more complicated topics, but not quite what you're talking about, which sounds super intriguing. But we've been trying to figure out, is there better ways to explain something to somebody that, you know, doesn't really know that much about water treatment, but really wants to understand at least some nugget of, again, making a choice, you know, our simple one of bottled water versus tap water. It's a choice that people have to make every day. And unfortunately, we found in research that more people of color and more people of low income buy bottled water than people in other groups. And you think like that's the absolute wrong group to fear their water and want to spend money, because it can be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times more expensive to buy bottled water. So the people who can least afford it are the ones who are most doing it. So trying to give information to say, you know, for one thing, that the sources of water are the same. And part of our animation, we really focused on that, of how to explain that there's not different water, because there's this perception that there's bottled water that's in some, you know, mythical place, and then there's tap water that comes from somewhere else. And trying to just explain some of those subjects, we really feel like, you know, this animation thing might be a game changer, that we can really start explaining things. So we're doing that, but we haven't yet gone the way that you've described, but it sounds super intriguing to think about things like that. Well, just as a quick aside for that, this group that is doing the thing I'm talking about actually had someone make a video, stop motion animation video to explain what that project was, right? So you go to the site and the thing you see is some trees talking about the project.
Wow.
So David, let me ask another question related to that same concept. So as the university starts considering the impact of community engaged research as part of tenure and promotion packages, one of the things I think is really hard is tracking impact, right? I mean, and so I think one of the challenges the university faces, or perhaps faculty who are going this route, is that if we stick to our traditional measures of counting tenure impact, you know, publications, national presentations, you know, grant dollars, some of that may not translate as well into community engaged research. So one of the things that I guess I'll ask you or anyone else on this panel is, you know, how should that be considered differently? How should impact of community engaged research be maybe documented or counted, that may be a little bit less traditional than what we've done in the past?
I mean, a simple metric that I would see on things I've been doing would be to say how many participants, you know, are there. I mean, there's a challenge we have on Facebook that went global with growing chilies, and there's, you know, a couple thousand people growing chilies around the world, right? That's, you know, bigger than the, you know, 10 people I've started with my version of the city thing, or the tree tracking. That hasn't really launched yet. But I mean, that's not, to me, it doesn't get the impact as much as it does about the participation, but data on participation could help.
Other thoughts on that from the panel? Different metrics for community engaged research?
Or thoughts from the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think participation is a good starting point, but certainly we're going to have to come up with some, you know, some more robust measures of impact. It could be a small community here in New Mexico that's impacted, that's a couple hundred people, which is not a lot of participants, but it could be a very significant impact. So I don't have any answers other than to say that I think it's going to be complex and take a lot of thinking from across a lot of units and people at UNM to come up with a robust set of measures.
I'm hoping a student that did some work with me now, but just going over to geography, who's interested in food justice and things. I'd love her to have a metric of, you know, I shrunk the size of the, you know, food desert by X amount, you know, or fractured it in different spots. Some other, you know, thinking about what is your goal is. Oh, Bill has his hand up. I'll be quick.
I was just going to mention the NSF has some resources respect to evaluation and assessment of broader impacts, as well as there's a center called CASE, Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education, that's got a lot of good information there about evaluation and assessment. And I would also add the Kellogg Foundation has the Kellogg Foundation Logic Model, which also has a section in there on evaluating and assessing outcomes and impacts, which, as Dave pointed out, differ significantly from just counting participants, which are normally considered just outputs.
Thank you. Bill, if you can put links in the chat, I think that would be really appreciated.
I was just going to say, I know that when we do projects for EPA, which is used to be our major funder, but now times have changed and they're one of many funders. In fact, we just counted up, we have 22 different projects going on right now. So we have lots and lots and lots of different funders, but EPA has always made a distinction between outputs and outcomes. You know, outputs being you're counting, the bean counting stuff, you know, this many people attended, this many communities did something, you know, just counting up. So it's got like the bean counter thing. And then they always want outcomes, which are what actually happened. You know, what was the change in behavior? And those outcomes are so much harder to measure, of course. And a lot of times in the time frame of actually doing a project, you can't even have an outcome. It's going to take so much longer to get there. But that's something we struggle a lot with in our project proposals, is writing what are the outputs and outcomes that we're going to get. And EPA, of course, wants them both. And I think most funders would. They want both the outputs and the outcomes. And how do you get those measures of, you know, actually having changed something, you know, like people do something different. There's been this, you know, more people are complying with regulations, or more people are drinking better water, or there's been this behavioral change that occurs. And that's something we struggle a lot with, of just what are those measures? How can you actually find any way to determine if it actually happened, and could it really happen in a year? So if they fund you for a year, is it realistic to think that what you do is really going to make a difference? That you can lay the groundwork, but the difference might be 2, 3, 5 years down the road. And that has been really, really a struggle with us, of just, you know, how do you do the outputs and outcomes of the different projects?
I wonder if we could go to Bo's question in the chat. Caroline responded to it in talking about the IRB, but I wonder if there are panelists or our participants who have had kind of a deeper way of addressing how to work with community. I think the IRB is really important, but it may not go far enough. And Bo has followed up a little bit too. Commonplace interactions, student-involved projects, and community workshops.
I mean, it's a world we live in like all the time. So for us, it feels like home, because that's all we do, is we're out there in the community all the time. So before COVID, I was pretty much on a plane, you know, usually 3 weeks out of the month, going everywhere into the community and doing trainings and that sort of thing. So it's less foreign to us because we're used to doing it. And we have had quite a few students who've done things, and now it kind of makes me wonder if I should have been more worried about it. But it's something that's just so second nature to us that we don't think a lot about, you know, these broader problems. But we had a project where we trained STEM students, and we were particularly looking for the earlier undergraduates, so freshman, sophomore. We were also trying to find students that were traditionally not in STEM. So we were seeking, that wasn't our only audience. We didn't exclude anybody, but we were trying to focus on those students to try to encourage them to stay in STEM. And we spent a semester once a week teaching them how to map water utilities. So it didn't matter what their major was, it was just, we were going to work with them once a week, show them what water utility assets look like, and show them how to make maps. And then we took the best 4 students out of that group, and we had told them all along that they could get a paid gig for the summer if they did a good job. And they really you know, quite a few students really put a lot of effort into it, even though they weren't getting anything for that semester. They weren't getting credits and they weren't getting money. They were just getting an opportunity to learn something new. And then we sent 4 students out into the community in New Mexico and had them map water utilities. So we picked very small utilities. We picked areas where the student had connections, like either a family member, a friend, somebody they could stay with, so that they could have a connection to the place. And then they went around with water utilities and they mapped. And we got probably about a dozen water utilities in New Mexico that ended up with maps at the end of it than at the beginning. So we really felt there was a great connection between the community, the students, everybody had a win. And we paid, you know, just a little bit of money to the students, you know, whatever a student normally gets paid. And these communities had maps. So it is something that, again, we do a lot of, and maybe I should be more concerned, but we're just so used to being out there, it just feels natural to us.
I'm curious, Heather, when you say map the systems, like, what do you mean? You're out there like mapping the water distribution system, or they're walking around the plant? They didn't have a map of their own distribution system. Wow.
No, there's about 650 water utilities in New Mexico, and I would venture to say that there's probably about half of those that probably don't have a very good map. And we're talking the smalls here, where there's no map of where the fire hydrants are. There's no map of where pipes are. There's no map of where the valves are. So we literally would have a student go out with a water operator, and they were using phone, really simple phone technology. We have an app that's cheap, real cheap app that we use as Fulcrum. And it has data collection fields, and the student would take a GPS location. They would collect information about, you know, manufacturers and years of install, whatever information was available. So they would just fill in whatever fields. And by the end, it would feed into a GIS map. So the students, we also taught them how to make simple GIS maps. And if the community wanted the actual map, you know, the electronics, we would hand it over. If they just wanted the paper version, we would print it out and give it to them. So it kind of depended on what the communities wanted. But we would teach the students that whole technology process, and just to give them an idea what water was like, what, you know, working with technology was like. So it was real simple stuff that any student, you know, they could be in math or physics or whatever department they wanted, but it was also a way to kind of say, hey, there are careers in water out here you might be you might be interested in. And again, like a dozen systems ended up with a map at the end. So it was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. It strikes me that's just like that software could have a lot of cool applications for community engagement. You could have people mapping anything just as a way to get them out there. And
yeah, the app that we use,
what's actually out there. It could be trees, like with Dave's stuff. It could be anything, right?
Yeah, the app that we use, Fulcrum, is not a water app. It's just a data collection app. So we can tailor it to whatever collection fields we want. We've used it for all kinds of things now. It's super, super simple. And we've taught ancient operators how to use it. We've taught young operators how to use it. So we figure it's like got to be fairly user friendly, because you can get, like, you know, the 70-year-old operator who hates technology, you know, after watching us for a while, like, oh, let me try that. And so we found it to be super simple. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways it could be used to collect, you know, all kinds of information.
What was the name of that app?
It's called Fulcrum, Fulcrum. And it's like a $25 a month license. We actually got an educational, we conned them into it being educational. And so I think ours is even cheaper than that. But it's, you know, $25 a month, and it has all of these different, you know, stores things in the cloud. You can dump the data 10 different ways. I mean, it's a super, super easy to use app. We've really liked it.
Well, it really sounds like, Heather, your team is sensitive to the community when you go into the community. And I think that's something to really be aware of as the big university of the state. You know, we're already approaching a community with a power differential. So that's something to really look at. I think we are going to have to close. We're 1 minute out. There's been a discussion about IRB. My experience with IRB is that they're really open to questions, and it's probably, if you were wondering if you have a question, that approaching IRB is probably the way to go. And it does broader impacts, because you're creating that data, does open that question. So if there aren't any other,
I would just say one thing, Andrea, that I just did want to follow up real quick on your point about the power differential. We did actually have some of our classes for the students who were going to go in the field. We taught, you know, we did teach them some of how to behave and what to expect, and even on both sides, like how they should behave when they're in the community and how they should protect themselves if there was ever a situation where they felt unsafe and what to do. So we tried to really work on both sides of that, you know, how they should act, how they should be professional, show up on time, you know, all of those types of things that you'd want somebody to do. And then of course, on the other side too, if you ever feel unsafe, you know, here's that side of it. So we did actually have a couple of our classes were related to that too.
It would be great to share some of that training. I think that would be really useful. So there's some comments here, but I think that we do have to close. Thank you so much again to the panelists, and look forward to seeing you at the rest of the conference.